The sky above Thessaloniki was overcast, and the sea wind carried a salty chill. Eleni Papadakis had returned to her childhood city for a short visit, bringing her 8-year-old daughter, Katerina, along to meet family. Eleni had always felt uneasy around her brother-in-law, Stavros. There was something about his silence that felt calculated, like he was always thinking 3 moves ahead in a cruel game no one else had agreed to play. Her husband, Nicholas, had died 2 years earlier in a tragic accident that still haunted her. Since then, Stavros had taken on an oddly prominent role in the family, especially in matters that did not concern him. He was the one who had insisted they all stay at his countryside villa for the visit. Eleni had declined politely at first, but her mother-in-law insisted. He only wants to help cook lamau. He misses Nicholas, too. The villa stood in the hills above Thessaloniki, surrounded by olive trees and distant views of the Aegean Sea. The place was beautiful, but something felt off from the moment they arrived. Stavros welcomed them with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. His wife, Danae, barely looked up from her phone as she mumbled a greeting. That first night, Eleni found it hard to sleep. The walls of the guest room were too thin. She could hear muffled arguments between Stavros and Danae downstairs. Something about money. Something about a secret. Katerina, in her small bed next to hers, slept peacefully, unaware of the tension crackling through the house like dry twigs ready to snap. The following morning, Stavros offered to take Katerina to see the farm animals on the property. Eleni hesitated. She hasn't had breakfast, she said. We'll be back in 20 minutes, Stavros replied, already holding Katerina's hand. She'll love the goats. Something gnawed at Eleni's gut as she watched them walk away. 20 minutes turned into an hour. Then 2. By the time she went looking, the sun was high, and there was still no sign of them. She called for Katerina down the empty vineyard rows. Nothing. Then she heard it. A faint sound. A muffled thump. Coming from the storage shed behind the kitchen. Heart racing, she ran towards it. She opened the door. And froze. Katerina was locked inside an old industrial freezer. Eleni's scream shattered the stillness of the hilltop air as she pulled the heavy freezer door open. Katerina lay inside, her tiny body trembling, lips turning blue, her eyes wide in frozen terror. Eleni wrapped her daughter in her coat, her hands shaking as she lifted her out and held her close. Katerina clung to her, teeth chattering. Who put you in there? Eleni whispered, her voice raw with fear. Katerina's voice was barely audible. Uncle Stavros. He said it was a game. A game. The words echoed in Eleni's head like a death knell. She carried Katerina back to the house, her heart pounding against her ribs, fury bubbling beneath the surface of her trembling exterior. Stavros was in the kitchen, calmly slicing bread as if nothing had happened. When Eleni burst in with her frozen child in her arms, he looked up, unfazed. What's happened? He asked, far too calmly. She was in the freezer, Eleni shouted. His expression didn't change. She must have wandered in. Children do foolish things. Eleni's blood ran cold. There was no panic, no guilt, no shock in his voice. Just rehearsed concern. Danae entered moments later, startled by the yelling. What's going on? Your husband nearly killed my daughter, Eleni spat. But Stavros stepped forward, already shifting the narrative. She was playing alone. I told Eleni not to leave her unattended. This villa isn't childproof. Eleni stood still, gripping Katerina tightly, realizing just how isolated she was. Her phone was back in the guest room. There was no signal out here anyway, and the villa was far from the city. No neighbors for kilometers. She locked eyes with Danae. There was a flicker there, doubt perhaps. Or guilt. Katerina needs a hospital, Eleni said. I'm taking her to Thessaloniki. I'll drive, Danae offered quickly before Stavros could object. The drive was tense. Danae gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. Eleni wrapped Katerina in a blanket and kept checking her pulse, whispering soothing words. She didn't trust Danae, but she needed her now. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed Katerina had mild hypothermia but would recover. Eleni stayed by her bedside all night. The next morning, she found something slipped into her coat pocket. A folded note. In Danae's handwriting. Meet me at the old church above the cliffs at dusk. He's done worse than you know. The sky over Thessaloniki darkened early that evening, casting long purple shadows across the hills as Eleni made her way to the old church. She left Katerina with a trusted nurse at the hospital, telling herself she'd only be gone a short while. But her chest tightened with every step away from her child. The church stood like a lonely ghost on the cliff's edge, its whitewashed walls faded and cracked with time. A rusted bell hung above the entrance, swaying gently in the wind. The gate creaked as Eleni stepped through. Danae was already there, pacing. She looked over her shoulder with haunted eyes. I shouldn't have written that note, she said, voice trembling. He'll know I've said something. What did you mean? Eleni demanded. What's he done? Danae didn't answer at first. Her gaze drifted towards the sea, restless and gray below the cliffs. He wasn't always like this, she said. But after Nicholas died, something changed in him. He started drinking more, staying out late, whispering on the phone. At first I thought it was grief. Eleni's fists clenched. And now he's locking children in freezers. Danae's eyes flicked to her. That wasn't the first time. Eleni's heart dropped. There was a girl, Danae whispered. 4 years ago. From the village. Her family worked for us. She vanished. Everyone said her father took her and fled after some gambling debt. But Stavros, she hesitated. He made me clean the back shed the next day. I found one of her shoes in the corner. It was covered in blood. Eleni felt the breath leave her lungs. Did you tell anyone? I tried. But he knows people. People who owe him favors. My own brother said not to get involved. That I'd ruin the family name. She turned to Eleni fully now, desperation in her voice. He'll do anything to protect his secrets. And now you've threatened that. Eleni took a step back. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the first person who's not afraid of him. Suddenly, the bell above them groaned, swinging violently though the wind hadn't picked up. Danae froze. A cold chill slid down Eleni's spine. They weren't alone. From the shadows behind the altar, a figure emerged. Stavros. I wondered how long it would take, he said calmly. Eleni's body stiffened as Stavros stepped into the candlelit shadows of the ruined chapel. His presence was calm, almost theatrical, like a villain who knew he'd already won. Danae took an instinctive step behind Eleni, trembling. I thought you were smarter than this, Danae, Stavros said, his voice smooth and steady. Dragging my brother's widow into your guilt-ridden fantasies. You locked her daughter in a freezer. Danae snapped, voice cracking. That's not a fantasy. He tilted his head. You call it locking. I call it teaching a lesson. Children need discipline. Eleni's girl is spoiled. And you, he turned to Danae, you've always been soft. Eleni stepped forward, heart thudding. She could have died. You knew that and you did it anyway. Why? His eyes met hers without blinking. Because you people never learn. You take. You mourn. You cry like you're the only ones in pain. But do you ever ask what it's like to be the one left cleaning the mess? Eleni didn't understand what he meant at first. But then he smiled, cold and deliberate. You think Nicholas was innocent? Stavros said softly. He left me drowning in his debt. And when the wrong people came knocking, it was me they threatened to bury. Danae gasped. You told me it was an accident. It was, Stavros replied. Until it wasn't. Eleni's breath caught. What did you do? I fixed the problem, he said. Nicholas crashed. His debts vanished. And I inherited the estate. Danae's hands flew to her mouth. You killed your own brother? Stavros looked Danae in the eye. I saved us. Suddenly, he stepped forward, and Danae instinctively blocked Eleni. But Stavros didn't strike. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A flash drive. He held it up like an offering. I'm not here to fight, he said. I'm here to warn you. If you go to the police, this will go public. Every sordid detail. Every dark corner of our family. Katerina's trauma will be headline news. She'll never escape it. Eleni stared at the drive. Her thoughts raced. Was it a bluff? Or was he really prepared to burn the whole house down just to protect himself? Before she could reply, Danae lunged forward and slapped the flash drive from his hand. It flew across the stone floor and slid beneath a pew. "Get out," Danae hissed. "Or I will go to the police myself. I should have done it years ago." Stavros stared at her, then back at Eleni, his jaw tightening. "You'll regret this." And with that, he turned and walked out into the darkness, leaving silence in his wake. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Eleni whispered, "We have to find out what's on that drive." Danae nodded. "And fast. Because he's not finished." The flash drive was caked in dust from years of neglect beneath the church pew, but Eleni retrieved it with trembling fingers. She and Danae wasted no time. They left the chapel without speaking, slipping through the olive groves under the fading light of dusk, their breaths short, their minds tangled in fear and fury. Back at the hospital, Katerina was asleep, her small face peaceful for the first time in days. Eleni kissed her forehead and turned to Danae. "I know someone in Thessaloniki," Danae said quietly. "A friend who fixes computers. He can open this without leaving a trace." They drove into the city under a veil of silence. The streets were darker than Eleni remembered. Or perhaps it was just her mind clouded with shadows. They arrived at a tiny electronic shop tucked between a butcher and a tailor. Inside, a man named Andreas greeted them with a cautious nod. He barely spoke a word, just led them to a back room and inserted the drive into his laptop. The screen blinked. A folder popped up. "Private, do not open." Andreas looked at them. "Are you sure?" Eleni nodded. Inside the folder were videos. Dozens of them, labeled with dates and names. Danae leaned forward, eyes widening. "That's the name of the village girl," she whispered. "And that one, that's a date just after Nicholas died." Andreas clicked a file at random. The video showed Stavros, seated in what looked like the villa's wine cellar. He was speaking to someone off camera. His tone was icy. "I don't care what she knows," Stavros was saying. "If she opens her mouth, she disappears." Danae gasped. He was recording himself? More likely, Andreas muttered. He recorded it to keep control over others. Or as leverage. They watched in horror as more videos revealed his private dealings. Smuggling operations. Bribes. Even discussions about forging hospital paperwork in the name of Nicholas. "He framed my husband," Eleni whispered. "Nicholas wasn't drowning in debt. Stavros made it look that way." "Look at this," Andreas said, pointing to a video time-stamped only weeks ago. In the footage, Stavros was alone, holding a glass of red wine. "She's back in town. Eleni. She never should have returned. But maybe it's a chance to finish what I started. Once and for all." Eleni felt her legs weaken. Danae caught her. "He planned it all," Eleni whispered. "Inviting us. The freezer. Everything." Suddenly, the lights flickered. And then went out. The room plunged into darkness. Andreas stood up fast. "Someone's cut the power." Danae's voice trembled. "He knows." The door to the back room creaked open slowly. A silhouette stood in the doorway. Not Stavros, but a man in black, with a radio clipped to his collar. Andreas stepped in front of the women. "Who are you?" The man raised a badge. "Inspector Giorgio. You're in danger. Come with me." The tension in the dimly lit shop was thick as mist. Inspector Giorgio stepped forward, eyes scanning the room. His voice was firm but calm. "We've been watching Stavros Papadakis for some time, but we didn't have a way in. Until now." Eleni exchanged a glance with Danae. "How did you find us?" "The flash drive triggered an alert," Giorgio explained. "One of the files was linked to a surveillance case we've had open for years. You just handed us everything we needed." Andreas backed away from the laptop. "Then take it. All of it. But protect them." Giorgio nodded. "We will. But we need to move. Now." The inspector led them through a side alley behind the shop. A black, unmarked car waited. Danae clutched her handbag to her chest, and Eleni kept checking over her shoulder. Inside the car, Giorgio turned to Eleni. He'll know the drive is gone. He won't rest until he's erased everyone who's seen what's on it. I need to get back to my daughter, Eleni said urgently. You will, Giorgio assured her. But first, we need you both to come to a safe house. They drove into the hills, beyond the city lights, past winding roads and steep drops. The house was modest but secure. Metal shutters, reinforced doors, cameras on every corner. Inside, an officer handed Giorgio a phone. He stepped away to speak privately. Danae collapsed into a chair. How did we survive this long without knowing? Eleni sat across from her, still processing. What do we do now? We fight, Danae whispered. With everything we have. Moments later, Giorgio returned, his expression grim. We've just intercepted a call. Stavros is assembling his people. He's planning to flee the country by tomorrow night. Eleni stood. Then stop him. I intend to, he said. But there's more. We believe he's keeping something or someone hidden. A woman. Possibly the missing girl from 4 years ago. Danae's eyes widened. You think she's still alive? We don't know. But we have a location. A villa in the mountains, once owned by his late father. Eleni clenched her fists. Take me there. Giorgio shook his head. It's too dangerous. She's my daughter's age. If there's a chance he's holding someone, I have to help. Danae stepped forward. So do I. Giorgio hesitated, then finally nodded. We leave at dawn. The villa in the mountains was far from prying eyes. Isolated. Forgotten. And it held more than just shadows. Dawn broke over the slopes of Mount Olympus with a pale, golden light. The roads were steep and narrow as the convoy of 2 unmarked cars wound higher into the hills. Eleni sat in the back seat beside Danae, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The villa they approached wasn't just remote. It looked abandoned, swallowed by ivy and decay. Giorgio parked 100 meters downhill and gestured for silence. We approach on foot. No noise. No radios. Eleni followed silently, boots crunching over the frost-kissed earth. The air was thin, sharp. The front gates of the estate were chained, but Giorgio's partner cut through them without a word. Inside the grounds, the place reeked of damp and rot. Broken statues littered the garden, cracked and crumbling. The villa loomed above them like a mausoleum. Giorgio raised his hand, signaling a split. One team went round the back, while Eleni, Danae, and Giorgio crept through the front. The door was unlocked. It creaked open into darkness. They moved through the dust-choked hall, past torn tapestries and shattered chandeliers. The silence was thick, every footstep echoing through the walls. Eleni's breath trembled. Her mind kept going back to Katerina, safe in a hospital bed, unaware her mother was walking straight into the den of the man who had nearly ended her life. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Giorgio gestured for them to stop. Then came a muffled sound. Crying. Faint and desperate from below. Danae pointed to a narrow door beneath the staircase. A cellar. Giorgio moved first, pushing the door open and leading them down a winding staircase that smelt of mildew and rust. At the bottom, behind a wall of stacked crates, was a small wooden door. The crying was louder now. Eleni pushed past Giorgio and opened it. Inside was a narrow room, barely more than a storage closet. A mattress on the floor. A bucket in the corner. And a girl, barely 16, curled in a blanket, her eyes wild and sunken. She flinched when the light hit her. Eleni stepped forward slowly. It's all right. You're safe now. The girl's lip trembled. Is he gone? Danae knelt beside her. What's your name? Talia, the girl whispered. He said if I ever left, he'd find me. He said he'd do to me what he did to the others. Before they could respond, Giorgio's radio crackled. He's here. Rear entrance. He's armed. Giorgio swore under his breath. Take her. Hide in the cellar. Do not come out until I call you. Eleni didn't argue. She took Talia's hand, and Danae closed the door behind them. They crouched in the dark, the girls breathing shallow and ragged. Above them, footsteps moved through the floorboards.
Slow.
Deliberate. Then a voice. Stavros. I know you're here, Eleni. His tone was playful. I warned you what would happen if you pushed. Danae clutched Eleni's arm. They were no longer chasing secrets. Now they were the hunted. The musty cellar air pressed against Eleni's skin as she crouched behind the crates, heart thundering in her ears. Talia trembled in silence beside her, her fingernails digging into the edge of the blanket. Danae barely breathed. Above them, Stavros's footsteps moved slowly across the rotting floorboards, echoing like thunder in a tomb. I gave you a choice, he called out. You could have gone back to your little life. But instead, you poked the wolf. Eleni squeezed her eyes shut, straining to hear Giorgio's voice or a scuffle to indicate backup had arrived. But there was only silence, and then the sound of a door creaking open. He's going into the kitchen, Danae whispered. There's a hatch, Talia said, pointing towards a panel in the ceiling. It opens into the pantry. That's how he used to bring me food. Eleni nodded. We need to move. Quietly. Together, they crept beneath the hatch. Eleni reached up and gently pushed. It gave with a soft groan. She hoisted Talia up first, then Danae. Just as she prepared to climb through, a loud crash sounded from the front hall. A gunshot followed. Eleni froze. More footsteps. Running. Yelling. Then another shot. This one closer. She hauled herself through the hatch just as the back door burst open and Giorgio's voice rang out. Drop the weapon. Eleni didn't wait. She pulled Danae and Talia into a cupboard off the pantry and closed the door behind them. Through the narrow gap, she could see the shadows of figures moving past. Stavros's voice was a low snarl. You think you can erase me? You did that yourself, Giorgio snapped back. Another scuffle.
A cry.
Something heavy hit the ground. Then silence. And then breathing.
Slow.
Measured. Too close. Eleni's skin prickled. The cupboard door flew open. Stavros stood there, blood on his temple, eyes blazing. One hand gripped a knife. Get away from them, Giorgio shouted, charging in. Stavros spun, slashing. Giorgio blocked it with his arm, the blade slicing through his coat. Danae grabbed a cast iron pan from the shelf and, without hesitation, struck Stavros on the back of the head. He crumpled to the floor, stunned but still conscious. Eleni grabbed the knife from his hand, stepping back, holding it with trembling hands. Stay down. But Stavros, dazed and furious, looked up with a sinister grin. You think this ends with me? Giorgio groaned, leaning against the wall. He's got connections. There'll be others. Danae looked at Eleni, her voice steely. Then we make sure he never gets out. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Reinforcements had arrived. But Eleni knew, as she looked down at the broken man on the floor, that this nightmare had only just peeled back its true skin. By the time the local authorities reached the mountain villa, Stavros had been restrained and taken into custody, bloodied but alive. Eleni stood on the cracked front steps with Giorgio, watching officers comb through every inch of the property. Danae sat with Talia under a thick blanket, gently stroking her hair. Eleni's mind was a storm. The man who had destroyed her husband, traumatized her daughter, and imprisoned a child for years was finally behind bars. But there were too many loose ends. Too many unanswered questions. Giorgio handed her a tablet containing decrypted files from the flash drive. We've found more. Contracts.
Payouts.
Names. Who else was involved? Eleni asked. Giorgio hesitated. You're not going to like it. One name stood out, bold and unmistakable. Leonidas Papadakis. Nicholas and Stavros's father. His father helped him? Eleni whispered. I thought he died years ago. He disappeared. Officially presumed dead. But these records suggest he's been alive, moving through the islands under aliases, funneling money through shell companies. Stavros wasn't acting alone. He was finishing his father's legacy. Danae joined them, her voice tight. That villa was his father's retreat. A place where he kept things hidden, including people. Eleni stared at the horizon. So Stavros was raised in it. That darkness. It wasn't just greed. It was inherited. Giorgio nodded grimly. We've frozen all accounts linked to the family estate. A team is tracking down Leonidas now. As dusk settled over the hills, Eleni returned to the hospital in Thessaloniki to reunite with Katerina. Her daughter opened her eyes and reached for her, and Eleni felt the weight of the past days begin to lift, just slightly. But it was not yet peace. The next morning, the police returned with news. Leonidas's trail had led to Crete. He had been spotted boarding a private boat. He was on the run. Eleni stood in the garden outside the hospital, phone in hand, watching the city slowly wake. She dialed Giorgio. If they run, she said quietly, we chase. Weeks passed. The court hearings began behind heavy doors and hushed voices. Stavros was charged with multiple crimes: attempted murder, false imprisonment, conspiracy, fraud. But Eleni knew what mattered most: keeping Katerina's name protected. The prosecution agreed. The child would not testify. Her trauma would not be paraded through the media. Danae testified.
Tearfully.
Powerfully. Her statement cracked open the rotten core of the Papadakis family legacy. Talia's parents came forward. They had long believed their daughter dead. Her return was both a miracle and a wound reopened. She now lived with a foster family far from Thessaloniki, in the green hills of Pelion. As for Eleni, she took Katerina away from the city. They settled in a quiet coastal town on the Peloponnese. There were no more hills to climb, no more cellars to search, but the scars remained. One evening, as the sea whispered its secrets to the shore, Katerina asked, "Will Uncle Stavros come back?" Eleni held her tightly. "No," she said. "He's gone." But she knew it wasn't a promise she could guarantee. Men like Stavros did not vanish with a sentence. Even caged, their shadow lingered in every cracked wall and memory. Weeks later, Giorgio visited with an update. Leonidas had been captured in a fishing village on Crete. He had changed his face, his name, but not his instincts. He would stand trial beside his son. The last thread was cut. Eleni returned to Thessaloniki one final time. She visited Nicholas's grave under the cypress trees and stood in silence. "I see it all clearly now," she whispered. "Not just the lies, not just the cruelty, but the strength of those who survived. The strength of a daughter who endured the cold, and a mother who answered it with fire."